All right, so it's 1 o'clock right now, 1 a.m., 12:59 a.m. to be exact. And all the lights are off. So it's just me here in the dark with my lamp and my computer screens. Today, I want to talk about a couple of things, right? I think first of all, closing, right? Closing is a little bit of a tricky business because you have to be able to read the prospect in the right way. Because if you don't read them in the right way, what can happen is that you'll lose the close because you thought you had some kind of rapport, some kind of relationship, and they tell you something, and then you get off the phone with them, you get off the call, and you never hear back from them. They ghost you. You can never assume that just because you have good rapport with somebody on the meeting, that they're going to see you as a friend, right? Now, you're basically playing the odds, which is that if you are friendly, if you're open, if you're trustworthy, if you demonstrate expertise, if you lead them on the call, um, if you're friendly, I don't know if I mentioned that, but if you do all these things and you're able to relate to them, say for example, you bring something up and you can connect on a specific point, there is a segment of people who are actually going to be able to connect with you and are open and willing to do that. Depends on various factors. I wouldn't necessarily say it would be on gender or age or anything like that, or cultural, because I've connected with many different people. I think it's based off of the person's personality type and your personality type, but primarily how open they are to establishing relationships. Now, that doesn't mean, like I said, that they're just going to see you as a friend, right? As somebody who they can just comfortably open up with and talk about a variety of topics and XYZ. And the reason why is because remember that you're selling, right? And they know that. Whether you think that you're a consultant or you're a banker, you're in this industry or that industry, you're in sales, right? If you're not building something, if you're not being technical, then you're effectively selling if you're not on the operations side, especially when you're speaking to clients or prospects. Like that is selling. That is exactly what you're doing, whether you're a CEO or a president or whatever, or an entrepreneur, a solopreneur, what have you, right? If you're talking with a prospect, now there are these meetings that they call, like, luncheons or business meetings or whatever the case is. And if you think that's not selling, you're out of your fucking mind. Why do you think they're even there? Why do you think the Japanese and the Russians, they go out with prospective business partners before they even talk about business, and they get wasted together? The reason they do that is because your personality naturally comes out when you're uninhibited, right? When you're drinking alcohol, you become who you truly are. It's less likely that you're going to be able to sustain the walls that you'll have in your sober life when you're drinking. I don't know if you ever had a sip of alcohol, but you know how it is if you ever have. So the point here is that don't ever think that just because you had one call with a prospect and you talk to them for 45 minutes is different if you're having multiple calls and you're not asking for the sale on the call, and there are some offers that are a little bit different, right? Where you're going to meet with the prospect or the client, prospective client, maybe 2, 3 times. You're going to conduct a visit or two. You're going to have a lunch or two. Uh, Maybe it's a deal. It's a contract that you're establishing. It's kind of like a long-term multi-year contract. There are many different types of deals. And then there's the other side of that. There are many different sides, but there's one side, which is that the one call close, right? That's another side of it, where basically the prospect sees some kind of ad, marketing funnel, whatever the case is. They go on your website, they schedule a call, right? It's typically a consult, which is like 10 or 15 minutes. The person qualifies them. It's an appointment setter, typically. They will qualify them to make sure that they are actually potentially qualified for the product or service that you're offering, financially and otherwise. And then they will set the call for what we call in the industry a closer, right? Now, you haven't met this person before, and you don't know what their experience has been with your company, with the setter, with other people in your organization. You don't know how their day's been going. You don't know who they are as a person. There are so many factors that are outside your control. All you can control is how you perform and how you relate to the person on the call, to make sure that you're present with them and you're doing what is required to I would say educate them to build a connection, to build a trust, to be able to educate them, and obviously to take them through your process, to take them through a call flow that will ultimately lead to the sale. Now, that process, it can be broken, like I've mentioned in previous videos, when you see that they're very dynamic and you need to be a bit more flexible with how you actually approach the sale, right? Which means, like as I think I mentioned in the first video, is that you don't sell to the prospect the way that you think they should buy. You approach them in the way that they want to buy. So if you see that they're a certain type of buyer, then just cater to that. They're very analytical. They want numbers. They want quantities. Don't get all emotional with them, right? Talk about what they want to address, because they're not going to buy if you don't actually talk about at some point in the conversation, you talk about what they need to talk about, the information that they need to have. Now you could be crafty and steer the conversation this way and that way, and be able to maneuver potentially depending on the prospect. And we could talk about that as well in future videos. But remember that you need to be solid in a few things, which is your framework, whatever. Scripting is not really the right word, but like phrase tracks that you might have and keywords that you use that tend to resonate with people, like I talked about, I think last time as well. If you have a script and you're using a script which is like fluid and dynamic, and you have it memorized and you can kind of riff off the cuff, and that's good too. Industry specific knowledge is very important. Product specific knowledge or service specific knowledge, as far as your own or the company that you represent, is going to be very important as well. In addition to having all the qualities of a good salesperson, right? Which is that you need to be personable, you need to be open, communicative, you need to be able to lead, you need to be able to inspire trust, you need to be able to be, what's the word? It's funny. The word that I'm looking for is proving that I don't have the capacity to actually do the thing that I'm trying to describe. It's late right now, so you'll have to excuse me, but it's not verbose. It's eloquence, I guess, right? In some way, you have to be able to like eloquently. You have to have that. Jesus Christ, I know it's a simple word. I can't think of it right now, but you get the point. So you need to have that, the ability to speak and to be dynamic with your language. It's kind of irritating me that I can't come up with the word right now. But anyway, so don't ever think that just because you're at the end of the call with a person and they tell you, and you tell them the price or the investment and everything sounds good, and you guys have been building rapport and everything is cool, and they're like, yeah, I mean, this is great. Like, I mean, pretend I'm a prospect right now. I'm like, yeah, this is great. Yeah, price sounds good. Yeah, absolutely. Let's book it. Yeah, next week. Yeah, I can do next week, Tuesday, 4 o'clock. Yeah, perfect. 4 o'clock. Okay. Oh, so you're taking the payment up front? Okay, gotcha. Um, I think I left my credit card in my car. So why don't you just call me in 10 minutes and then we can kind of go through everything together. Oh, that's okay. Um, yeah, you know what? I think so. I have my meeting. It's over in an hour, and I can call you about an hour, and then we can just take care of everything then. That sounded really sincere, didn't it? That sounded sincere, right? It sounded like I was actually gonna buy from you, didn't it? Yeah. So sometimes that doesn't happen. Doesn't play out that way. I tricked you, didn't I? Well, maybe I didn't, but see what I'm saying, right? Don't make any assumptions, but you also have to be careful. There's a fine line, and I talked about this with somebody today who's had decades of selling experience and the highest performing individual at their company, which was a national bank. And yeah, we were in agreement, which is that there's a fine line between being too aggressive and not being aggressive enough. So there are the deals that, because you're not assertive enough, you don't actually push them over the line and they would have closed. And then there are other deals where you were too aggressive and they didn't close. So it's how do you know? Like, how do you know what the difference is? Well, that's the tricky part. You have to be able to, and I'll talk about this a bit later. Like I'll break things down as far as the cues, what you can do to be able to be more in touch with other people's emotions, being able to read them well and not losing unnecessary deals. But the whole lesson of today's video is that the best thing that you can do, the best thing that you can do, your calls may not be recorded, right? Because maybe you're not on Zoom and you're not and you're doing this stuff in person. Maybe it is, right? If your calls are recorded, you need to review your calls, or at least, and if they're not, it's okay, right? Even if you don't review your calls because they're not recorded, and you can't do it, or your meetings or whatever you want to call it, you need to actively think about what happened after the meeting, why it didn't close when you thought it was supposed to close. That's the key. They might come back around, but they might not. And by the time you realize that they have or haven't, then you've already forgotten about the meeting. So the best thing that you can do is make the assumption that you lost the sale and try to figure out why you lost it, why you think you may have lost it. So that way, if they come back, you can kind of maybe dispense with some of your analysis because it was inaccurate, because, hey, they reached back out to you and they wanted to move forward. Now, if you think that they were forward leaning and they didn't, you can make assumptions about their situation, what they were going through, and this and that, and the other thing. But remember what I talked about yesterday as far as taking responsibility. You can't control that. The only thing you can control is what you did. You can always find something. You can always find something that you can improve. Always. There is no call that is completely perfect. I fall into that trap as well, thinking that some of my calls are this was the perfect call, excellent call. In fact, sometimes like I can actually get there where I'll close 2 deals and that second deal it just fell in my lap because they were just kind of offering me something else that I didn't even. They're like, hey, can I pay you more money for this thing? And I'm like, sure, let's talk about it. Now, I understand what I did to actually get to that point, but it doesn't mean that in that process, there isn't some kind of improvement that I can make. That was the only point I'm trying to make, is that no matter how perfect you think something is, you can still make an improvement, which doesn't mean that you need to be critical of yourself and judge yourself. It's really more of like a distant kind of looking back at your process and then determining, what did you do well and what could you improve? Remember, always focus on the things that you did well as well, right? You don't want to only focus on the things that you didn't do well, because if you do that, you're going to skew your entire perception to a reality that is not actually representative of what's true, right? Because in your mind, in your mind, you're thinking that the way you're thinking about this problem, especially if it's in one way, is the reality of that problem, is the reality of the situation. Whereas you're missing the other side, right? It's kind of like looking at a diamond. Every time you turn, when you're turning a diamond, when you're turning a stone, it's the same object, but because you have a different perspective, it looks different to you, right? So keep that in mind, is that you need to have a balanced picture. Otherwise, you're going to think that you're better than you are, or you're going to think that you're worse than you are. And neither one of those two options is really what's going to lead you to become excellent, right? If you want to be excellent at what you do, you have to be able to be balanced. So the lesson here, and the reason I'm stating this, is because I make the same mistakes as well. Same mistakes, right? I make them. I'm not here on my high horse, telling you I'm some like master closer who closed 100% of all the deals. That's not what I'm saying. I make the same mistakes. And what I'm saying to you right now is what I need to hear, right? It's kind of like advice that I'm giving to myself as well at the same time. So it's not like I learned this lesson, now I never have to learn it again. No, I'm being reminded of things continually, right? You learn, you improve, you might regress, you might progress 5 steps, you might regress 2. Progress 5 steps, regress 2. Progress 5 steps, regress 1. Then progress 5 steps, regress 3. 5 steps, regress 1, right? So you always want to keep that momentum going, but you might regress, kind of like, if you look at the stock market, the trend may be going this way, but there's obviously ups and downs along the way, right? As long as you zoom out, you're going to be able to see a complete picture, and that's going to be able to give you a greater sense of equanimity and balance internally, right? So you're not constantly stressed out or just shocked that reality is not representative of your fantasy, which is some kind of kingdom, some kind of heaven on earth that you've created, but because you haven't properly admitted to yourself about the potential downsides, when they happen, you're shocked for some reason. Well, you got to think about those too. You got to think about the upsides and the downsides. So again, it's about taking the entire equation into consideration. So keep that in mind. if you lose a deal, the best thing that you can do, or after you have a meeting, right, where say for example, you again always assess your performance, right, whether what you're doing is immediately consequential to the end result or if it's leading there. You still have to kind of reflect on that process. But that immediate consequence of the end result, say for example, you're in the moment and the prospect or the client or whatever the case is says, gives you some objection, or you guys part ways and they're going to think about it or whatever the case is, right? Where, yeah, sure, let me read this over. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. Now, if that's part of the protocol, then that's fine, right? There's a protocol that, so I'm working for a couple of companies right now. And one of the protocols is sending a contract, right? So you explain the entire process, right? There's a price involved, there's a contract, but there's also a follow-up meeting. So now basically they've consumed all that information and they're dumping like 20 questions on you, right? So it's a lot to handle on those particular meetings, and you better be fucking sharp because you can't close those deals otherwise. So so that's kind of like the moment of truth, right? That moment there. If you think you lost a deal, right? If you think you did something to lose it in some way, then you need to reflect on that and write it down, talk about it, think about it, talk about it maybe with other people as well. See what you can learn from them. It doesn't even have to be other people in the industry. It could be somebody that you trust and and that you like and that you respect, right? Don't just talk about this stuff to like random people or people that you don't respect. I don't know why you would be talking to people you don't respect anyway, but that's beside the point. But yeah, really, and again, sometimes you feel like if you don't want to talk to anybody, you just want to kind of internalize it, right? You just want to think about it and just do that. And if you want to talk about it, if you feel like you need to talk about it with somebody so you can get some kind of feedback, then do that. Don't fight these internal impulses or instincts that you have to be able to solve a problem. Like you have to be able to mobilize those resources. So do that, and then you can come up with a hypothesis, and then obviously over time, either the next day or 2 days or a week or whatever the case is, eventually you're going to find out whether they close or they don't, right? And if they don't, then you can kind of return back to that and reconfirm everything and just make sure that everything you do going forward is in direct relationship to the corrections that you're making because of that error, right? Maybe you don't know if it's an error in that moment, but eventually you're going to find out if it was or it wasn't. But nevertheless, you're still making an improvement to the process itself. Whether they end up closing or not, you're still trying to make an improvement to the process. So even though you think that you did something that caused them not to close, so you make that improvement, if eventually they do close, say for example, a week later, you lost nothing because you made the improvement. If they don't close, well then again, you made the improvement, so you're not going to make that mistake again. So just keep that in mind. Don't get down on yourself. It is very common to feel frustrated. I was feeling frustrated a bit. I'm in this exact situation, right? So I was feeling frustrated for quite a bit, maybe like an hour, a couple of hours. Sometimes it can affect you, but you want to be able to, employ techniques that are able to get you back to where you are, or habits or actions or whatever the case is. So I hope that was helpful, and we'll talk about, some details, tactics and all that stuff in future videos. There's going to be a ton of these, so don't worry about that. So yeah, hope you found that helpful. It is now 1:17, and I believe I started at 12:59, so not quite 1 a.m. So I should be going for about 18 minutes now. And yeah, have a good night. We'll talk soon.